You have tried every single consequence. You've taken away playtimes, you've taken marbles from the marble jar, you've given timeouts, but nothing is working. So, what consequences actually work, and what is the neuroscience behind it? Let's take a look. I'm Danielle Douglas, the Behaviour and Neuroscience Specialist. We have helped over 87 countries around the world, supporting over 60,000 people. Our behaviour planner was Education Book of the Year 2025 finalist, and we've just been nominated for another award. If you haven't already accessed our free resources, then please do so. We also have a full behaviour library here on YouTube, and you might find this video interesting. The Behaviour Brains children's book has launched, and this children's book teaches children about their behaviour brains, how to manage and how to switch them. If you haven't grabbed a copy, grab one now. So, what are consequences and how do we actually get them to work? We apply a consequence when we want a child to stop doing something or to change their behaviour. We apply a consequence with the best intentions, and then nothing happens and nothing changes. So, let's take a look at the neuroscience behind it and how we can actually change children's behaviours. For a consequence to work, it needs to be a few things. It needs to be specific and linked to the behavior that you would like to change. It needs to be timely and it needs to be appropriate. So let's have a look at exactly what we mean by these points. So just like rewards, we need to tag the behavior. We've got a video about rewards that work, and you can check that out on YouTube as well. But just like rewards, and we tag the behavior as effortful, we need to do this with a consequence. So the consequence needs to be specific and linked to the behavior, which is why we always say that taking time out or taking things away from a child isn't linked to the behavior and therefore won't change it. A consequence needs to be timely and appropriate, which means it needs to be applied as soon as possible after that behavior has occurred. We talk about all of the time the Ebbinghaus forgetting curve. This is when children forget 50% of what has happened within 1 hour. Yet we are leaving consequences and applying consequences an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours after the behavior, and children will have forgotten 50 to 75%, which means they don't remember what has happened and they don't remember the behavior that needs changing. The consequence needs to be specific and linked. How many times have you seen children sitting outside your classroom or standing in the corridor and you ask them what they've done and why they're there? Why are you here? What's happened? And they have no idea. Just last week, there was a little girl sat outside my classroom and I asked her what she had done and why she was there, and she had no idea and couldn't remember. This means that the children haven't signified that behaviour in their brain as one that needs changing, which means the behaviour will never change. We tell all of our schools that we are working with and all of the teachers that we are working with as well that taking away playtimes or missing out on something does not change or will not impact that behaviour, because it is not specifically linked to the behaviour that they've done that you would like to change. For example, if we make a mistake when we are learning to drive, then the driving instructor doesn't wait until the end of the driving lesson to tell us what we did wrong. We would then revisit the mistake that we made, we would practice, redo, and then we would continue. This is the same for children. We cannot wait until after the event, tell them what they did wrong, and then expect the children to remember and change it. It doesn't quite work like that. We need to trigger a neurological response within a child's brain, which means we need to get the children to think about the behaviours that have happened and the behaviours we would like to change. We use something called the Children's Consequence Book to do this. And this means that children are actively thinking about the behaviour that they did and then actively thinking about the behaviour that they will do next time. This means that we need to switch the children's brain from the amygdala to the prefrontal cortex to make any changes to the behaviour. We'll look at this again in a little while. Consequences also need to be timely. I've recently spoken to a school and they were leaving their consequences to the end of the week. This doesn't change children's behaviour, but it does cause a few other things. As I mentioned before, children will have forgotten 50% of information within an hour, which means that children need to be applied a consequence or punished for their behaviour as soon as possible. This then will tag in a child's brain that it was that specific behaviour that needs changing or is not effortful. If a consequence is left, then what can happen is children can get into the state of anxiety. This means that a child's brain will switch into the amygdala. Now, the amygdala part of the brain is the emotional part of the brain. In this part of the brain, children are not thinking, listening, processing, or learning. So when a child is in amygdala, a state of anxiety due to the prolonging of the consequence, children are not going to listen, learn, or process anything about their behavior. I recently worked with a little girl and her mum, and they were talking about the consequence that had been given to this little girl was postponed until the next day. Now, this made behaviours worse. That child didn't sleep. The child couldn't stop thinking about the behaviour or the consequence, which therefore meant that when the child went into school the next day for a consequence, she was sitting in the amygdala. She wasn't listening, thinking, or processing, which then means that that behaviour will not be changed next time. When a child is upset or they are angry or frustrated, usually at the time a consequence has been applied or when the consequence time comes round, children are sitting in the amygdala. Now, the amygdala is the emotional part of the brain. We've spoken that this cannot listen, it cannot think, it cannot function. So if children are sitting in the amygdala, nothing is going to change. So our secret is, if we want a consequence to work, stick, and change a child's behaviour, we need to switch their brain from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. And we do this in a few different ways. We use something called the Children's Behaviour Book. Within the Children's Behaviour Book or the Children's Consequence Book, what this does is it gets children to think about and reflect upon their behaviours. This switches the brain from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. Using things like questioning or reflection and problem solving, children can switch their brains from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. This means that children can think about the behaviours that they have done, they can revisit those behaviours, they can think about what they would do next time. We call this behaviour mistake retake. You can create a children's consequence book for yourself, or you can check ours out as well. But what you need to do is think about switching that child's brain from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex. Remember, you can do that by questioning or problem solving. If you would like more information on the children's book, The Behaviour Brains, to help them understand their own behaviours and how to switch their brain, you can find the Behaviour Brains on our site as well. So remember, if we want a child to stop doing something, change their behaviour, or for the consequence to work, we need to have it timely, appropriate, and linked to the behaviour. We need to switch the child's brain from the amygdala into the prefrontal cortex to get them to think about and consider the behaviour that they've done. Don't forget to like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on our behaviour library. And if you would like to talk about behaviour, I'm Danielle Douglas. Let's talk behaviour.